And our reading this morning comes from 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 to 16. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. And then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." And then he was afraid. He got up and he fled for his life, and he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. And he asked that he might die. "It's enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." And then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. And suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." And he looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank, and then he went into the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. And at that place he came to a cave. He spent the night there. And then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, and he went out and he stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." And then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, at Abel-Maholah, as prophet in your place." This is the word of the Lord. This morning we get to invite Jack up. Jack, thanks so much for preaching this morning. Appreciate you.
Well, the first mistake you made was not having Priscilla preach this morning, so you're already on a deficit, okay? You're already down here. That's the person you should have had preach. But I opted to. I was Mark McHugh's professor at Seattle Pacific University. I got to see this brilliant mind shape in front of me, him and a couple friends like Josh Gritter and others. Mark was quick with laughter, had the right priorities, and we are really honored that Mark would have asked us here, though of course he doesn't have to listen to us, so it's not a big deal, is it? We also had a wonderful day with a lot of you yesterday, spending a whole day really trying to live into the Holy Spirit around 3 verbs: ponder, mentor, and go. And then we had a wonderful evening with some young adults at Jennifer and Steve's house. It has really been a great weekend. And then the United States attacked Iran. And all of a sudden, my sermon that I had prepared and sent to Rochelle on Friday morning seemed inadequate. And so I have 2 versions. One I wrote for Friday, but even Friday, when I got on email, ready to send it to Rochelle, what came into my inbox, that 16 people had been killed in Kyiv and 110 injured in a Russian attack. So there hasn't been a lot of good news globally in our world. And we are a church in the world. We are a church that serves the world. We are the church made up of people in the world. The world exists outside the stained glass windows, and we are called to light, to be a light to shine into that world. So I spent the better part of last night awake, trying to think about whether my sermon Friday was relevant, or in what ways it could be made more relevant to the situation. And Priscilla knows, and Jennifer knows, through several cups of tea, that I'm still at a loss. But I've written some things down, and this is largely the sermon that I had prepared and sent to Rochelle because I couldn't change the PowerPoint. Oh, the PowerPoint. I couldn't change the PowerPoint, so I was constrained. Thank God for that. I couldn't change everything. But I will make some applications of the text of Elijah, which of course, as Matt read it, probably seemed like, what a strange text. What is this guy going to do with this text? But I'm going to make some applications in light of the attack. There'll be light applications, slight applications. But I couldn't stand here and address a global reality. I could preach without addressing a global reality, but that's not going to be the bulk of the sermon. But I want to warn you that there will be a little bit that smacks of politics, not a ton, but a little. It's not Mark's view, it's not your view, and for those online and the thousands who are going to listen to this sermon over the weeks to come, tens of thousands, this is not Harrison Square Presbyterian Church. I'm a guest here, and I'm delighted to be here, all of you out there in virtual land. So let's talk about Elijah. Elijah was known, as our theme is the Holy Spirit, Elijah was known to be a man of the Spirit. So one time, he tells another prophet, tell King Ahab that I'm here. And this other prophet, Obadiah, says, no way I'm going to tell Ahab you're here because the spirit wind is going to take you away and no one's going to know where you are. That's a man of the Spirit. And then when he goes to die, right, his protégé Elisha, kind of insensitively, I think, at the moment. I mean, here's Elijah. He's about to leave the earth. And Elisha says, give me a double portion of your spirit. So Elijah was known to be a man of the Spirit. And yet even men and women of the Spirit have their bad days. And we're going to look at a bad day. A very bad day. A very, very, very bad day for Elijah. Okay, but let me give you a little background first because I am an Old Testament professor. I got to give you a little bit of background. So we're about in the 800s before Christ. So we're like 9 centuries before Jesus walks the earth. And in the northern kingdom, there is a king called Ahab, and he's married to a woman called Jezebel, right? Ahab and Jezebel. And they rule the northern kingdom in Israel. There's also a southern kingdom by now, but they rule over the northern kingdom. And in order to rule, they have a lot of people whose job is to say, you're great. Absolutely. Do it. You can't be wrong. You're right. And these are called prophets. They had whole companies, hundreds of prophets who ate at their table, who made their living by telling Ahab and Jezebel, this is great. Go ahead and do it. But there's a problem. There is a drought. And the drought has gone on for 3 very long years. And so the people are getting extremely restless. Now, the person who perpetuates this drought is Elijah, who keeps telling Ahab and Jezebel and their prophets and their people, you're screwing up, you're not obeying Israel's God. And so what's going to happen is Ahab and Jezebel are going to find out that Elijah is here, and they're going to have a confrontation on Mount Carmel. So, if you look at this, there are actually two mountains on this screen. The one on the left is Mount Carmel, and the one on the right is Mount Sinai. And we're going to look at Elijah on both of these mountains. We're going to start on Mount Carmel, and then we're going to take him all the way down to Mount Sinai. In the text Matt read, it's called Mount Horeb, but they're just different names for the same mountain. So we are now on Mount Carmel, and Elijah is calling all the prophets of Baal, all the prophets who serve Ahab and Jezebel, for a confrontation, for a contest. So, when King Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" And Elijah answered, "Hey, I've not troubled Israel, but you have and your father's house, because you've forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now, therefore, have all Israel assemble for me at Mount Carmel with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah," that was the female god, "who eat at Jezebel's table. And they will have a major confrontation." So Ahab sent to all the Israelites and assembled the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah then came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow God. But if Baal, then follow Baal." The people didn't answer him a word. So Elijah said to the people, even I only am left, a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets number 450. And then he gives a whole bunch of instructions about what they're to do to build altars and things like that. So they took the bull that was given them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, crying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice and no answer. They limped about the altar that they had made. Israel can't decide which God they want to serve. And this Hebrew verb that Elijah uses to describe them, "How long will you go limping?" is really a terrific verb. I've put it up there in red because it's exactly the same verb that on the second to the last line describes the prophets of Baal and their limping around the altar. Elijah is comparing the Israelites, who can't make a decision about which God to serve, to the prophets of Baal, who limp and dance and skip and hop around the altar, cutting themselves, trying to get their God to listen, and they get absolutely nowhere. All that movement, all that limping, all that hopping, all that dancing, and nothing accomplished. No voice, no sound, no nothing. That's what Elijah accuses Israel of doing. The word could be even said two crutches. Israel is doing this all day, and they look just like the prophets of Baal because they can't decide which God to serve. You see, the God of the mountain, Yahweh God, Israel's God over here, is supposed to be a great God, but God's up in the mountains. Baal over here is a God who's known as a nature God, who gives them figs and yeast and plants. So in a drought, who are you going to go with? You're going to go with Baal, because Baal's the nature God, and God is on a distant mountain very far south, right? You're going to hedge your bets. You may have a spirituality that goes with Israel's God, but when it comes to your material stuff, you're going to go with Baal, because Baal is the one who gives you raisins and cakes. Okay. I thought a lot about this verb last night, because the President of the United States concluded his speech with 4 references to God. I don't know if you read the speech or heard the speech. And it ended like this. Second to the last line was, I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. I think putting love for God and love for a great military in the same sentence could be considered limping between 2 opinions. We'll trust God for spiritual matters, but for material matters, we'll trust our great military. Now, we need a military. No one doubts that. And we need a God. But to say we love God and our great military in the same sentence gives me pause. We may need both, but is it wise to glorify both in tandem in the same sentence? When it comes to God, are we hedging our bets? Do we really trust God materially, physically, for our world? Admittedly, it's hard to trust God, not just for spiritual things, but for material ones. And that was what Baal was so good at. He was a nature god, flour for unleavened bread, milk and honey, figs and raisins. And so, as I read the transcript last night, I worried about the close connection. We love our God and we love our military. How about we hedge our bets and make sure we somehow have both? And I worried about that through the night. But this also has a very strong personal application too, because I don't know about you, but I love to hedge my bets. So, Jesus says, sell all your possessions and give them to the poor and come follow me. That's a pretty clear command, right? Sell all your possessions, give them to the poor, and come follow me. So a week and a half ago, we sold a little cottage we had in East Texas. We don't own a home. We've sold our possessions, except for 2 cars. We've sold our possessions. And then you know what we did with that money? We put it in a money market account that makes 4.1%. I hedge my bets. Every day, I hedge my bets, right? Now, Priscilla and I are doing research. We're doing this really cool research on women between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War who defended their right to preach at a time where very few women had a right to preach. And we've been doing this really cool research, and we have a graduate student doing all this digital humanities stuff on finding women we could never have found. And in Allie's notes to us, she said, here's another female laborer. Like a completely nondescript female laborer. Okay, I'm in the wrong here. I'm in the wrong notes. That's the problem. Yeah, well, what can you do in the middle of the night? So we came across this little line in Allie's Excel chart that was about a woman called Mrs. Miranda Vinton Harris. And when I think about how readily I hedge my bets, I limp between God and security, God and security, I read this. Miranda Vinton Harris was born in Willington, Connecticut in 1819. She was called to the Karens, a tribe in Burma, Myanmar. She left the United States on September 14, 1841, and arrived in Myanmar, in Burma, I'll say that, it's much easier, on January 2nd, 1842. So she was on the ship for about 4 or 5 months. Her obituary reads, she was employed during the rainy season in teaching and other appropriate work in Malmam, and during the dry season in teaching in the villages and in traveling in the jungles and along the streams of Burma. After 12 years of being in Burma, in 1854 she returned to Boston. On November 8th, 1855, she returned to Burma. When it looked like she wouldn't have enough money to get from Boston to Burma, Christians who were the natives of Burma, the Karens, said, we'll get the money and get you back here. In fact, the chief of one of the tribes of the Karens was so anxious to have her back, he said, I will pay her way back. And on April 8th, then she was back. She married another missionary. It's kind of a beautiful story. But on Saturday, August 30th, she became sick a few months later. She returned to teaching on Monday, but she became sicker and she died. On the day she died, she requested, if the little children would come in and sing, I think I could go to sleep. She said again, can you sing the Rock of Ages? Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. Then she sang a song about Sabbath rest and died. Her husband would write, from my earliest acquaintance with her in 1846, I have always esteemed her. And after our marriage, I loved her more and more till the day of her death. As a wife, she was all I could wish. As a female laborer among the Karens, in my judgment, none have surpassed her. Her brother recalled, the Karens have been coming up in little companies all day, and among them have been men whom I have seen at the graves of their own parents and children, who have met the shock with no outward manifestation other than the silent tear. And yet these men, on approaching us and attempting to speak, have lost all power of utterance when she had died, and only were able to give expression to their feelings in tears, followed by suppressed sobs, and these again by audible weeping, and in 2 cases, the loud wail. Such was the impact of a woman, Mrs. Miranda Vinton Harris, who didn't hedge her bets, who didn't leap and dance and hop between 2 opinions, who trusted God for the spiritual and the material. Now, I don't know if any of us are going to make that sort of commitment. I mean, if I'm going to be called as a missionary to Burma, doggone it, I want it to be business class. And so, times have changed since then. But as I was reading her story, I thought, what have we lost? The power of her commitment. The whole of her life spent with the Karens in the unknown jungles and by the rivers there and dying there and being wept over there. This is what it means not to limp between two opinions. This is what it means not to hedge our bets. So whatever we make of this story for ourselves, both Elijah's and hers, we are challenged not to limp between two opinions, not to hedge our bets. That's the Israelites. They couldn't quite decide where they wanted to go. Elijah, on the other hand, was super active while they were limping. Look at all the words I put in color. He repaired the altar. He took 12 stones in blue. He built an altar in red. He made a trench. In purple, he got the wood in order, in whatever that color is, orangish. He cut the bull in pieces, and in light blue, he laid it on the wood. And then he said, fill them up with water, and fill it again with water, and fill it again with water, and we're going to watch God act. Elijah was all in. They're limping like the prophets of Baal, and Elijah's running and jumping and doing everything and getting everything done, and God is coming, and on the horizon comes the rain. And then it all falls apart. They're limping, he's doing, and Jezebel gets wind of it. And King Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. And Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was scared to death. And he got up and he fled for his life, and he came to Beersheba, way far in the south, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. Now, the original sermon on Friday morning was going to talk all about what's in red. Then he was afraid, he got up, and he fled his life. But I got to thinking about what happened in the last week. And what really bothers me here is what Jezebel does. She squashes any dissent. She won't have anyone disagree with her. She has 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, and they're all saying, yes, you're right, do it, go, you're the best, you're wonderful. And there's Elijah, and he dissents. And he opposes, and he criticizes, and he even kills all these yes prophets. And she won't have it. I'm worried that our country no longer tolerates dissent. Republican governments and Democratic governments. We want everyone around the leader to say, yes, you're great. You're wonderful. It doesn't matter who they are. You go to the Democratic convention, and everything's wonderful and perfect. You go to the Republican one, everything's wonderful and perfect, and two visions of America. I wonder that the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, whose job was to bring information to the president, was iced out of it over the last week when she said, Iran is not ready with nuclear weapons. I'm concerned that Republican leaders, but not Democratic ones, were alerted to the attack, but it was the United States who did the attack, not just the Republicans. All of us are part of it. And I worry that what Jezebel did and all the kings after them in the disastrous centuries of Israel's history was to squash dissent. Now, I understand that Harrison Square is a church where people disagree politically. Thank God for that. And this is an opportunity for you to be a city set on a hill, to be a light to the world. Rather than going to a church where everybody is a Christian nationalist or everybody is hyper-liberal and you agree with everybody, you are brought together under the lordship of Jesus Christ in the power of the Holy Spirit to be a light to the nations, not just although you disagree politically, but because you disagree politically. You still build Shalom Village. You still have boxes out there with bags to give away and things. You still have a box where you give your old glasses. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. There will be dissent. When there is, as Priscilla said to me this morning, when there is attack, there's going to be dissent. There should be dissent. There should be questioning. There should be more dissent, not less. Do you know the Bible is a book of dissent? Whose writings made it into the Bible? The Old Testament prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Obadiah, Amos, Hosea. None of these was the king. None of these was the government. All of them were dissenters. When you're reading the Bible, you're reading a book of dissent, of discontent with the way things are. And Jesus, he was always dissenting, wasn't he? He didn't want to serve Rome. He didn't like the Pharisees. He argued with the Sadducees, and the Herodians were out to lunch, according to Jesus. A bunch of political wannabes. The Apostle Paul was a dissenter. What was his whole mission in life? To allow Gentiles, non-Jews, to follow Jesus. And so he disagreed with most of his brothers and sisters in Judaism. The Bible is a book of dissent. And so you have the chance, as a church, uniquely as a church, to stay together and honor dissent. If you agree with the attack, honor dissent. If you disagree with the attack, honor the people who agree and be in conversation with them. That is the light that our world needs. And you uniquely, peculiarly have that. In Dallas, our churches are divided. We have very few that aren't determined more by politics or conservative versus liberal theology than anything else. But you can be different. You can be the light to the world that understands that being together unto the lordship of Jesus means that we talk with people, we meet with people, we work alongside people for justice with whom we disagree. This is your moment for that. We don't squash dissent, we embrace it, and we learn from it. Okay. I've lost track of where I am in terms of time. You just got to live with me on this one. We're kind of back to now my Friday sermon. So Elijah runs away to Mount Sinai in the far south. Why Mount Sinai? What happened at Mount Sinai? Huh? 10 Commandments. Moses went up the mountain, got the 10 Commandments, saw that they were partying, broke the 10 Commandments. Moses goes back on the mountain, gets a second 10 Commandments, and brings those down. Mount Sinai is where Moses really made a name for himself. And so what does Elijah do when he's scared to death of Jezebel? He runs down to Sinai, and he retreats to the past. And he goes into a cave, his little man cave, where he's nice and safe. And God says to Elijah, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And you know the story. Matt read it. There was a great wind, but the Lord wasn't in the wind. There was an earthquake. The Lord wasn't in the earthquake. There was a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence, or in the King James Version, the still small voice. And it came about that when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. This is super important. When God says in that bright red, pass by, I will pass by, that is the verb that God had used in Exodus 33 to tell Moses, I'm going to pass by. You know what God is doing? Even though Elijah has run scared to death of Jezebel, and even though he's now hovering in a cave, God says, it's okay, I'm still going to honor you. I am going to pass by the way I passed by Moses in Exodus 33. So even though he's retreating to the past, God promises to pass by. Now Elijah only has to do one little thing. All he has to do is go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord so that the Lord can pass by. And so that's what Elijah does, isn't it? Does he do that? No! I mean, golly, you've read enough of the Bible to know that when God says something, they generally do something. Abraham, go, get up, and Abraham gets up early in the morning, right? Boom, 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 boom. The rhythm is broken in this story here. God says, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And so Elijah waits till it's all over. And when it's all over, gets that mantle on, and he walks out. He missed it. He missed God. Altogether. He stayed in the cave until after God had passed by. And notice something else here. When he is told to go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, where does he go? Where does he go? Yeah? Where does he go? The entrance of the cave. Look at this. Elijah go out and stand on the mountain of the Lord. So what you expect is Elijah's going to go out and he's going to stand on the mountain of the Lord. Right? And it's all going to pass by, and he's going to feel the divine presence, and he'll be ready to go back to Mount Carmel. But instead, he only goes out as far as the entrance of the cave. He won't go past the security of where he is. He won't step out of the cave. So he waits till God passes by and is gone, and even then, he only goes this far. But he won't step on the mountain. He only steps to the edge of the cave. And he's done. He's done. God says, okay, appoint a successor. If you won't step out of the cave, Elijah, I can't use you anymore. You're done. You're done. Here's what we've got, just to tie this together a little bit before I illustrate one last time. Elijah had come to Mount Sinai to retreat to the past and be like Moses, and God obliged, promising to pass by Elijah as God had passed by Moses. But Elijah was absent he stayed in the cave. So God wasn't in the wind, God wasn't in the quake, God wasn't in the fire, and all that Elijah heard instead was silence. The sound of sheer nothing, the eerie silence after a storm. Elijah had waited and hung back and missed God altogether. He had not stepped out of the cave, not until the storm was over, and even then he didn't step out onto the mountain the way God wanted. And the crazy thing is, he has learned nothing from any of this. Notice the question. So God says, go out and stand on the mountain, and it all happens. And he went out and stood. And then God said, before God passed by, what are you doing here, Elijah? And then it all happens, earthquake, wind, and fire. And God says again, what are you doing here, Elijah? Do you notice that his answer before God comes and after God comes is exactly the same? He hadn't learned a thing from all that happened because he stayed in the cave where it was safe and sound for him. Let's not stay in the cave. These are difficult times, right? These are very hard times. These are frightening times. These are hurricane times. These are 125 airplanes flying at the same time from Missouri to Iran and some across the Pacific as decoys. This is a frightening time. And it doesn't matter whether you're Republican, Independent, or Democrat. These are frightening times. And it's tempting to stay back and be in the cave. And as a church, these are frightening times. It's really hard to be a church with a diverse population nowadays. Much easier to slide in with the people with whom you agree. Whew. These are frightening times for a church, certainly for a pastor like Mark and someone like Matt. It's really hard to keep people together under the lordship of Jesus when politics keep pulling us apart. But you know what? God is passing by Harrison Square Presbyterian Church. Even if, like Elijah, you're deeply frightened by all that's happened and may happen, even if you're deeply troubled, deeply wounded, deeply worried, that will not keep our hurricane God from passing by this group of people right here, sitting around these tables and in those chairs. So leave your mantle behind and step out of the cave. Stand in the wind. Stand in the earthquake. Stand in the fire. It's not safe there, but it's enthralling. Do you want to be safe or you want to be alive? You know that little passage in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where Susan asks Mrs. Beaver about Aslan, the lion, and Susan says, "Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." And Mrs. Beaver replies, "Oh, if there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly." "Then he isn't safe," Lucy says. And Mr. Beaver huffs, "Safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you." So step out of the cave.